Okay, great. So we would do a census to assess needs for government services. Merle, what were you going to say?
For voting purposes, maybe.
Great.
It's very important because it determines how many members of Congress.
Right.
Correct.
And and when you kind of politically mess with it, I'll be gracious. You are doing that for a end purpose of impacting how money is distributed and your power in Washington.
Great. So a census gets used for allocation of resource. I mean, ultimately, it all comes back to allocation of resources, all from the perspective of the state, right? Any other ideas?
Rabbi, do we also use it for knowledge, for demographics, for
Mhm.
who are we? Answering that question with data?
Yes, well, it allows us to have the information to then ask the question, but I don't know who then accesses it. But yes, I mean, population centers, demographic studies, things like that, for sure.
And Rabbi, I don't know how this fits in, but census data is released, I think it's 40 or 60 years or so. And I went back and looked up census records from my parents from the 30s and 40s, and it was sort of interesting to see where they lived and the address and who lived there and the names and their origins. It just, historical purposes. It's good data.
So you were able to go back and access your parents' personal records from the census. Is that what you're saying?
Census records that my parents had filled
Yeah,
out,
yeah, yeah.
yes. And
Into
grandparents.
ancestry.com,
And
you
Grandparents.
can get it.
grandparents. And
Grandparents.
grandparents.
Grandparents, actually, not parents, grandparents.
And it was
Thank you.
beautiful, the handwriting and how they described people. We used it to demonstrate our heritage of where people came from, and it was fascinating. We got census records for my grandparents. Well,
Great. So I'm fascinated with this, and we're gonna look. There's a reason I'm asking about this, but I'm fascinated that and not surprised that our answers, and these were some of the things that came to my mind as well, our answers about why a government would do a census have to, and it makes sense, perfect sense, have to do with allocation of resources, voting, things that are of interest to the population as a whole. And then we're having a conversation about seeking out individuals' information from the census records. The government isn't doing that, but you are, right? And so there's a line here. And one of the questions that I want us to be asking as we go through our Torah study today, excuse me, is what does the Torah have to offer about people and counting? Because I don't want to tip my head too much, but we are in the book of Numbers, which is called Numbers for a reason, because the book begins with a census. But it's not the only census that's taken in the book of Numbers. There are actually two full censuses taken in the book of Numbers alone. And it takes up a lot of Torah real estate to do that. So the question has to be why. There's something extremely important about counting the people in the book in Torah, in the context of Torah. Now, I say all of that, and I recognize that there is no census in this week's Torah portion. But we're going to get to this week's Torah portion, but I want to start by doing a little review from last week. So I want to look just quickly, share my screen at the beginning of last week's Torah portion, which is the beginning of the book of Numbers. On the first day of the second month, in the second year following the Exodus from the land of Egypt, Adonai spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting, saying, that's all set up. So it's right. This is it. What do? Take a census of the whole Israelite company of fighters by the clans of its ancestral houses, listing names, every male head by head. You and Aaron shall record them by their groups from the age of 20 years up, all those in Israel who are able to bear arms.
Wow.
Okay, so what is the function of the census that kicks off the book of Numbers?
Or the military.
For the military. And this makes sense, right? This is the beginning of the second year after the Exodus from Egypt. So they're starting the long road. They're still at the beginning, the nascent stage of this people wandering through the wilderness. And it makes sense. They're going to need to have their military, right? Up and running. Any other purpose for this census or any thoughts about the military? Why this is what they're counting for?
Would it be for the allocation of land for the different tribes?
Actually, yes. Yeah, very good, Cindy. It does that is the rationale because they are it's chaos at the beginning of Numbers. That's the way we understand it. And as I said, when we did for those who were with us for our little virtual Shavuot evening study session, Numbers is, I like to call it the book of kvetch, right? Because throughout it, it is these people who are, I mean, it's understandable. They were slaves and now they're free and there are no bounds. They're in the wild wilderness. And they have to figure out how to have enough order to function. And everyone needs their place. Everyone needs their place in the wilderness. And so in an attempt for everybody to find their place, there is an allocation of land. And they have to allocate the land according to how many people there are. So again, the need for the census. That was great. So they know that they're anticipating their needs, or God is anticipating their needs. They're going to need military because they're going to be traveling through and encountering peoples along the way that they're going to need to be able to hold their own. And they are also going to need to have their place, and the land can only get allocated according to tribes if you know who's there. Great. Okay, so those are two different reasons. Neither of those reasons, by the way, were reasons that you said about why a country would do a census today. They're connected, but well, actually they are. Maybe the allocation of land is similar to what Merle said about the setting up voting districts, right? Not exactly the same, but it's similar. Okay. But there's a hint here. And with this, we're going to look back at the text. We're going to look at the Hebrew, one little piece of Hebrew, and then we're going to move to this week's Torah portion, because I think there's another hint here about why the Torah, and in particular, the book of Numbers, seems to have this fascination with counting the people. So, okay, so in verse 2 here, it's the first key phrase is take a census, right? The Hebrew is this. Even if oops, sorry about that. You can see it's in the bold. You don't need to be a Hebrew reader to see this. Se'u et rosh. That's the Hebrew for take a census. Let's see if we can dissect that a little bit. Does anybody know what Rosh means? Like Rosh Hashanah? Oh, he's pointing to his copy. Yes. You could come to our ECC Shabbat. We all had to point to our Rosh. Yes, very good. It means head. So count the heads is really literally what it's saying, except there's a deeper meaning. And this is the beauty of the Hebrew. The word se'u literally means, and that's this first Hebrew word here, it literally means lift up. Lift up the heads. of the whole Israelite company of fighters by the clans of its ancestral houses, living the names of every male head by head. So take a census. So how do we take a census? It means literally, you do it by lifting the heads. And I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment. Oh, except I just lost you on my screen. There you are. Okay. Imagine in your mind what this looks like. A sea, hundreds of thousands of Israelites, and Moses and Aaron are told, lift up their heads to count them. Only male heads. I know that's another whole piece, right? That's not for important conversation, but let's go for the people as a whole, right? What's happening when people lift that? Why is this word used? There's something really elemental here that is so important for us. Why is this the word used as opposed to, we have lots of other words in Hebrew for counting and numbers. So why lift up the head? Susan, go ahead.
Well, head is the controlling body, part of the body, and lifting up has a positive connotation to it. Standing up for what you believe it. When you're lying flat, you're prone and weakened and submitting to a higher cause. But this one is stand up, lift up your head, be proud.
Great.
And be counted. Be responsible.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Merle, go ahead.
Lift up your heads and pay attention to whatever's happening around you.
Right. It is literally the very beginning of Numbers. It's the first thing. We are on a trip, guys. You better pay attention, because if you're not paying attention, you could get lost in this crowd here. That's great. So on one hand, it evokes the stand up, lift up, be lifted up for what you believe in and be part of something. And on the other hand, it does evoke the sense of like, pay attention. We've got something going. Something's about to happen here. Great. Brad, go ahead.
Well, maybe I'm expanding on what Susan said about just when you think of people who are looking down, they often seem to be depressed, sad, unhappy, and we're kvetchers. So this is already leading us into the kvetching theme of the book.
Foreshadowing of what's to come, right? That's great, right? So there's an implication that the Torah doesn't tell us this, but if we really dive deep into the language, we can imply, this is where Midrash comes from, right? That perhaps they're heading into this, no pun intended, they're moving into this next phase from a starting place of heads down, which makes all the sense in the world. They were slaves. They had been beaten down. So lift them up. Great. Ben.
Well, I'm not sure how this fits in, but as I recall back looking at my grandparents' census, they had identified or called out the head of household. So is this a colloquial way, lift up the head, so that the head of the household or the group is somehow identified, and it creates a way to, segment or group these households in the count?
Oh, interesting. It could be. It doesn't tell us one way or another. That's very, very interesting. Lift up literally the head of the household.
Identify that
head. Who that person is, right? Lift them up so I can count them above the population, the sea of everybody else. Very possible. Susan, did you have another thought?
Yeah, another thought, again with the head, but head has another meaning. That's the meaning in English, which Benjamin just brought up. When you're a head of a committee, when you head, which is a synonym also for lead. And then also when you think about military, they have to stand straight and at attention, and of course with the head up, and they're judged by that as well. So it's not only stand up for what you believe, but you're going to have to stand up for the military.
That's right.
Guerrilla warfare, and of course they hide, but
It's not going to serve anybody well if they, I'm glad we're on Zoom, not on the
Exactly.
phone, right? If they walk into the, to
Yeah.
tend to conflict, kind of hunched over, the body language piece.
Yeah, for a Torah study.
Yeah, beautiful. So it is all of these things. I love these answers. The other thing I can imagine is Moses and Aaron standing, looking out at this sea of people. And if they're looking down, what are they seeing? You see the tops of heads, right? But if they look up, if the people look up, what are they seeing? Their faces.
Faces.
Right. And it's the faces that they want to see, because it's the face that is, that's how we can really see who somebody is and where they're at. Okay. All of that. So still, why such an obsession with it? I want to bring you, and we haven't even gotten to this week's Torah portion yet, but we're going to get there. If you're picking up on this, on why the obsession with taking a census and counting, I don't know if I call it an obsession, but why the focus, right? In the book of Bamidbar, right at the get-go. And I want us to look at one commentary before we get to this week's Torah portion, because it connects. All right. So Rashi, based on this bit from the beginning of Numbers, asks the question. I'll translate. Rashi says, why the census? Why is it starting with the census? And then why is there one later? And then he answers the question, because they, the people, were dear to God. Because they were dear to God, God counts them every now and then. When they went forth from Egypt, God counted them. When many of them fell in consequence of their having worshipped the golden calf, God counted them to ascertain the number of those left. When God was about to make the Shekhinah, God's presence, dwell amongst them, and that was when at the building of the tabernacle, God again took their census. For on the first day of Nisan, the tabernacle was erected, and shortly afterwards, on the first day of Iyar, God counted them. So why does God count the people so often? Rashi's answer is simple, because God cares. God cares. It reminds me of my years as a camp counselor, and every time we had to go somewhere, camp counselors get so good at counting. You have to literally count heads to make sure you don't lose any kids. And that's what God was doing, according to Rashi. But why? Not because God was afraid of liability, because God cares. God cared. So this is a very different understanding, again, as to why a census would be taken than our thoughts about why a government would take a census. Go ahead, Brett.
I say this as a CPA. This is why God wants Jews to be CPAs.
Because we're good at counting?
Because we're good at counting.
Bravo. Bravo.
Where it all began.
And those of us that are social workers are always making sure everybody's there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Mona, go ahead.
I also think to your point, and yes, there's a lot of counting and record keeping. I think it's because they don't want anyone to be lost or not viewed as part of us or not important.
Exactly.
And I think there are people
matters.
who do the census in the US who think the same thing, and there's, of course, people who may not care. But
well, I think, and this is kind of the meta idea. I know we're just talking about numbers right now, but I think a value proposition here is that it's easy when you're looking at a mass of humanity to only see the numbers. But when we lift up the heads and you can see into somebody's eyes, it is a mass of humanity made up of a mass of individual human beings. And if God cares, then we better care, right? We're taking our lead from God. So absolutely. We have a lot to learn from this. Penina. You're muted, Penina.
Okay. they were about to join the other tribes who never left the country, who never left. Only 70 people went to Egypt, and 600,000 came out. So I think it was also a matter of acceptance. They should be accepted by the tribes because each tribe had his own flag. They had to go in and join the tribes that never left, people that never left.
Wonderful.
So it's a matter of acceptance also. Who is going to really believe in that one God? Because this whole idea of separation at the time was according to what gods you worshipped, what
Right.
idol you worshipped.
Right.
So I think it was a matter of you going in there. You're going to become a part of something very important. There is a nation there that believes in that one God that nobody sees.
Right.
And you are right by saying, looking at the faces, you can tell by their expression, by their care, who they can really count on. And that's why the counting was.
Yeah,
They
so I want to
stood up
connect.
and they
I
were
want to connect
counted.
what you're saying to one thing that we talked about a little bit earlier, maybe
Right.
before you logged in, which is it is the go and be accepted, find your place
Yes,
you belong.
yes,
It is this
yes.
constant desire to, and that's human nature, right? We
Right.
need
To
to figure out
belong.
where we belong. So there's acceptance, but there's also, it goes in both directions. They're the people who had to find where they were going and where they belonged. And then the community needed to accept them.
Exactly, because
So
they
it is
raised the
interesting.
flags according to the tribes
Right.
before they went in.
Exactly.
So,
That's what we were talking, not the flag, we were talking about the places, right?
right,
So,
right.
so the counting is actually a deeply, deeply personal act. And that gets reinforced in this week's Torah portion. So we're halfway through our Torah study. Time to look at this week's Torah portion. Here we go. What's in here is something that is there. Part of this is very familiar and part of it is not. But we get to, or well, I shouldn't say it's not. Part of it is more familiar, part of it is less. Here we go again. In this week's Torah portion, just a few chapters later, God spoke to Moses, take a census. Here we go again. And now they're looking at a particular segment of the community.
Army.
Take a census of the Gershonites also by their ancestral house and by their clans. And before I move on, what's the Hebrew word? It's the same, Naso. And that is the name of this week's Torah portion, is Naso. And actually, I just want to point out another little Hebrew thing here. We talked earlier about the Hebrew for taking a census is se'u et rosh, which is like to count the heads. Naso is the same. There, you hear it's a similar, it's the same root. Naso, se'u. So take a census, lift up the heads of the Gershonites also by their ancestral house and by their clans, record them from the age of 30 years up to the age of 50, all who are subject to the service of the performance of tasks for the tent of meeting.
Wow.
For this group, it's not, this census is not about looking for the military. This is the job of the Gershonites was to carry the what's the word I'm looking for? The textiles for the tabernacle. They had to count, or they had to carry, they were the schleppers for the tabernacle, right? These are the duties of the Gershonite clans as to labor and porterage. They shall carry the cloths of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting with its covering, the covering of dolphin skin that's on top of it, and the screen for the entrance of the tent of meeting. The reason I wanted to bring this kind of detail is because what's the job of the Gershonites? They're the sacred schleppers, right? Sacred schleppers. But what are they supposed to do? And here it is in bold. They shall carry. And what's the Hebrew? V'nasu. It's the same Hebrew word to carry is that it is for taking a census. I'm gonna see if I'm looking at confused faces. So whether you're a Hebrew speaker or not, what's the connection between, there is a connection, so let's unpack what it is, the connection between counting or taking a census and carrying. Brad, go ahead.
Well, there's a philosopher, Levinas, who has the theory of the concept of when you look at someone's face, you have an obligation, a responsibility to that person. So raising the head, looking at somebody's face is all tied in with responsibility. And here what we're dealing with is the responsibility of this group is to carry the Mishkan. So I'm drawing a relationship between the face, looking at the face, and responsibility.
Beautiful.
It's
Beautiful.
great. I have something little to add. The word for marriage in Hebrew is nisuim, and it's spelled with the same letters.
That's right. That's great. Thank
So
you.
you are getting into a relationship, very, very close relationship with God and with the rest of the people who believed in the same God as you.
Because when you're married, thank you for bringing that in, because when you're married to somebody, what do?
Carry
Hopefully
the responsibility
you
of
lift
another
them
person.
up. Hopefully you lift them up and you carry them. That's great. Thank you. Merle.
You're welcome.
I'm just thinking too that part of this responsibility is to make sure everybody shows up that's supposed to
Yes.
show up, and that you have all the material necessary, that you don't get there and build your Mishkan and there's nothing, and you don't have enough to cover it or for the sides or whatever.
Right. So there's some collective responsibility here. You better make
Right.
sure. And that goes back to the conversation earlier about everybody knowing their place. It wasn't just where you belonged, it was also what was your job? Because guess what? We need to hold each other, we, the Israelites standing in the wilderness, right? Need to hold each other up, but together, our tribes, we have to hold up this entity called the emerging Israelite people, right? The emerging Jewish people. So there's responsibility one to the other, but there's also a sense of collective responsibility. Thanks. Susan.
So thank you for pointing this out, these two censuses. One is to protect the Israelites, to fight for them, and the other, what are we fighting for? We're fighting for the faith, the tabernacle, and the like. So I think that's, in wars, I've lived through some, I know the difference between soldiers going off to what are we doing here in this foreign country, to those, for instance, World War II, who had a sense of, we know why we're here, and then we have a responsibility back home. So I think of the two poles of of a culture.
Oh, that's beautiful. Right. We're seeing a lot of poles, I'll use your word, right? So individual purpose and communal purpose. We've also talked about the poles of the community accepting people and people leaning into the community to go find their place, right? That also exists. And exists on a communal level and on a small clan level and on an individual level. So this is great. Any other thoughts before we look at one other place in the Torah portion where that same shorish, that same root word appears? We have one more place it's gonna, and then our job is to figure out what it all has to do with each other. Mona, go ahead.
Just a quick question. Was everyone a full human being in this portion? Meaning, unlike what America did with blacks, they were not a full human being. They had partial counts.
Well,
was everyone the same as a full human being?
Thank you for asking, and really important to clarify. I don't think I can answer it the way you asked, though, because it's a matter of who was counted. And you put
okay.
into the chat at the beginning, right? It wasn't like the men are count and the women are a half. They only counted the men
Okay.
in that initial one. So we don't know.
Okay.
But we do know is that this, again, is it censi? The censuses that were taken counted the people for the purpose, for the specific purpose of each particular census. So why were only the male heads counted at the beginning? Because they were looking at who would be fighters, right? The Gershonites, we actually don't know. It was probably still just the men, but the Torah doesn't tell us.
But one tribe or one group did not have more value. A male head was one of all peoples.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Panina.
Okay, you brought the subject of race. In 1957, Israel paid the Sudanese $1,000 at least, I think, if I remember correctly, to bring the Falashi Jews from Ethiopia to Israel. So color was never a problem. And they had Bibles and they have Torahs of their own that they kept. Supposedly, they were descendant of the Queen of Sheba that actually Solomon married. So we already know that there the color was not a problem. And those people are integrated into the culture of Israel. We had in 1971, I think, a beauty queen by the name of Titi something, and she was Ethiopian, black, and by the way, they're gorgeous. And they married within our community. I had a great nephew, and a niece, great niece who married. A person, by the way, the word Falashi were not given to them because they chose it. It was given to them by the people that they surrounded them that were called non-wanted. Falashis were non-wanted, not belong. And in order to get them out of there, like I said, Israel paid a lot of money just for the right to fly over them, Saudi Arabia at the time, just to get them out of there, per person, a lot of money. So I should just remind you guys that the color issue was never an issue, not in Israel, ever. Okay?
And to bring it back to that question, it's what are we doing? We're lifting the heads and counting because every person counts.
Counts,
So
exactly.
interesting, and thought until just this moment that this is our first Torah study since we finished the counting of the Omer.
Right.
So as Jews, again, to Brad's point, we have a lot of counting, a lot of accountants, right? We counted days, and now we're through the Omer, but still we're counting, and we count time. It still is. I mean, the book begins by saying how many months out of the Exodus we are. Okay, lifting up the heads, counting. One more place that it appears, and I have a feeling this one might sound familiar. So in this week's Torah portion, perhaps the part of the Torah portion that this Torah portion is best known for comes a couple of chapters later in Numbers chapter 6. This is what we commonly call the priestly benediction. This is where it comes from. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons. Thus shall you bless the people of Israel." So Aaron and his sons, the priests, hence the priestly benediction, shall say to them, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and protect you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. May God deal kindly and gracious with you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God lift up God's face to you and grant you peace. Yisa Adonai, right? God, this is the priestly benediction or the threefold benediction, right? What is the last piece? I want us to really look at that last line. Yisa Adonai, God should lift up God's face to you and grant you peace. How do those things work together? May God, this is aspirational, it's phrased as a blessing or as a prayer. May God lift up God's face to you, which not such, not such an easy thing to do. We've talked about lifting up people's faces. What is God's face?
So that's a good question. But maybe it's, God's often, one says that God hid his face. So, and then we were ignored when God's face was hidden. So perhaps it is that God shows his face, not literally, because we can never see it, but being gracious, would you use it, and good to us. So, I mean, they said during the Holocaust, God hid it, God's face was hidden.
Hmm.
And other portions
And also in the book of Esther, God is hidden.
Yeah.
Specifically, it's God's face, though. Yeah.
But
Right.
face would imply seeing and hearing, and then doing by will. So it has more resonance.
Okay, wonderful. Brad, go ahead.
Well, I'm back to this idea of the face and its connection to responsibility. I mean, we're in a covenantal relationship with God. So God has responsibilities to us as well as we have responsibilities to God. So this is, again, that, reminding God of his responsibilities towards us by lifting his face to us and reminding us of our responsibilities to him.
Nice. Very nice. What does it look like? I mean, answer that question however you hear it. What does it look like when God lifts God's face? How does that itself?
I mean, I think it's metaphorical. I don't think
right.
it's
Okay.
not literal.
Yeah, I'm not actually looking for a caricature. We don't need to turn on, there's a whiteboard function on Zoom. We're not going to turn that on. But so what's the metaphor? How does that show up metaphorically? But go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm thinking when I humbly want to communicate with people, making eye contact and really trying to connect with the person so they see my face, they see my eyes. It certainly helps get my message across. And I wonder if we can carry that over to this metaphorically, so to speak.
Great. Go ahead, Panina.
I think it's a matter of pride. When you say Naso, it's like Nasi, president. That's what we call a president, Nasi. And same letters,
and what's a prime minister? Goes back to our earlier conversation about
Nasi is a president today.
Right, and a prime minister is Rosh HaMemshala, the head, right?
Right. But the word actually prefer president. So in other words, when you lift up your head, you are becoming, each one of you becomes the master of your own actions, of your own feelings. It's like taking responsibility. This is as I understand it.
Right.
For each other and for yourself. Because the president is not just for himself. He's responsible for everybody else.
That's the goal. Yes, for sure. So I want to go back to this metaphor of what is it when God lifts God's face? What is it? How does it manifest?
He's proud of you. He's proud of what he did, what he created.
Right. That would be a why, right? Why would God lift God's face? Maybe also if we're continuing to go anthropomorphism of God, so God can see what God's proud of.
Right.
I don't know. It's taking me back to, lifting my face up when to the beginnings of this conversation where my head is down and all of a sudden I'm looking up. I'm not sure what I'm not seeing something literally, but it's that process of raising the head and all that entails metaphorically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it's a multi-layered metaphor here, right? So I would imagine that if we go down that path, that how does it manifest itself for God to lift God's face? And to go to Penina's comment about God's pride, well, guess what? If we are able to lift our heads, our faces, then maybe that is God's face being lifted to us, right?
You're believing.
So God needs us to own our space and to be who we are and to not cower away from our roles. Again, here they're still at the beginning of the book of Numbers. They're still at the beginning of the 40 years. They got a long road ahead, and they need everybody in that kahal, in that mass of bodies, needs to own their space, because otherwise it's not going to be good for anyone or for the collective. Okay. So maybe that is God's face shining, or being lifted when we lift our own. Merle, go ahead.
I think that however you see God and God sees you, it's the reassurance that you've been seen.
Ooh.
In a way, it's being thankful from the other side. I'm thanking you and letting you know in whatever way I can that you've done the right thing.
So, yes, let's sit with that for a moment and remember that last line of the blessing specifically. I want to go back to that because I think there's something just said, Merle, specifically about this particular blessing. What is this last piece of this blessing? It's a hope, a prayer that God will lift God's face to you and grant peace. Put peace, bring peace to you.
Peace can come in a lot of different ways to a person.
Great, say more.
I'm thinking back to the days when I was a volunteer coordinator and how we thanked people. And now is the time of year where congregations are thanking people. And but I think that peace isn't just peacefulness and quiet. It's peace within you that you've done the right thing. And that somebody's acknowledging it, no matter whether it's God or a human being or whatever you choose to believe in.
Yeah. To go to this idea, what does it look like for God to lift God's face? Maybe what it looks like is peace, right? That when God lifts God's face, this is why we pray for this. Pray, pray, pray. When God's face is lifted, there is a sense of peace. But the peace, the shalom here is, you said it perfectly, Merle. It is not only a lack of war, though we will definitely take that 100 times over, but it is that interpersonal peace too. Shleimush. It comes from the word shleimut, which is a sense of wholeness. So if God lifts God's face, maybe what that looks like is that we are granted a sense of wholeness in who we are, so that we can lift our faces and occupy our space and do what we need to do for ourselves and our community. Penina.
Yeah, this is great. I'm thinking that when he created Adam, it said also that he created Adam in his image. ויברא את האדם בצלמו, in his own. So when I'm thinking of people, that the ability that we have to build airplanes that weigh tons, but yet we know how to keep them going in the air. I don't think any other creature but people were able to do it, right? So human beings were given absolutely the capabilities above some animals, maybe not all the animals. But I always say it. Whenever I see an aeroplane, I say, God, there is a God, because who else can build stuff like this that will fly in the air and weigh tons? Okay, so we are given gifts, and people should appreciate it and use it for the better good, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. To take
So,
God's gifts and use them to
and
make
not use it to burn people or to kill them and stuff
right.
like
But instead, too, and your airplane example is not it's very appropriate, right? We're talking about lifting and carrying, right? So specifically with regard to something like airplanes, but in general, lift and carry, that's what we do. We lift each other up when everybody counts. So
that's good.
here's the question. Why are we not very good at it? Why in our society, we're reminded every day, but I can't seem to get past, the tragedy in Boulder last weekend. And as a Jewish people, where is our responsibility to lift and carry each other? Of course, we want to care for our community. But where's the tension here? It's like you could look at this and see a nice flowery kind of, isn't that nice? And we can pat ourselves on the back and feel nice because there's a little bow around the Hebrew and we can understand the Hebrew. But we can also take this understanding and turn outside to the world and try and use it. So why is this so hard? To lift each other up. Doug.
God gave us free will.
Enough said. Right? God gave us free will, and which means we have the ability to not do it. Yeah. God gave us free will. We have the ability to not do it, and yet we are constantly challenged that we need to do it, because the opposite of it is counting every single person and making sure every person is there so that they can be carried along. Ben, go ahead.
Well, I mean, your question, why can't we do it? And the general populace, I mean, thousands of years of institutionalized and sanctioned anti-Semitism is part of the answer why we can't do it.
That the world at large hasn't stepped up to this challenge.
For whatever reason, resentment or some other more complex reason. But there is, anti-Semitism is quite real, and it's been going on for a long time. And, we're seeing it now as we've seen it for thousands of years.
Right. And to our conversation today, I would go to the language that gets used on a frequent basis. I think it fits perfectly. It's rearing its ugly head, lifting its ugly head, as opposed to God's head. Brad, and then Rob.
There was an article about what's wrong with Christianity in the New York Times this week, with modern Christianity. And it was this idea that we're looking vertically to God and not horizontally to God in our fellow men. And maybe that's part of the answer why we're too focused on ourselves and our relationship with God, and not enough with our horizontal relationships of finding God in our relationships with other people.
That's such a perfect fit for exactly this conversation, right? God wants us to lift up their heads and count everybody. Thank you for that. Merle, go ahead.
I think people are, excuse me. I think people right now are seeing more anti-Semitism that they saw a long time ago, depending on your age and where you are, what your life is about. But I also think people are afraid to step into other people's business and get involved where they're so worried about being involved in their own life, whatever it might be. I mean, yesterday I went to this organization here and packed snack bags for the homeless, and there were people that were doing it that said, why are we doing this? Don't they get enough? Doesn't the organization have enough money to feed them all year long? Which they get most of their food to feed the homeless from schools that have lunch programs, and they have a lot of leftover food that they donate. But seeing people that were afraid to even come pack the snack bags because they didn't want to be in a place where it's a Jewish community and a Jewish group, they were afraid that they would be seen or that they would be
seen affiliating with a Jewish organization, or
right.
be seen packing snack bags.
They were afraid that they'd be seen in this group where it's a Jewish organization and somebody that's anti-Semitic might come and attack the program. I mean, my philosophy is may be wrong, but today's world is what it is. I'm not going to stop going to temple. I'm not going to stop traveling. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And, you know, we've taught the girls that too, but it's still, there are a lot of people that just don't want to be, you know, they don't want to come to services because they're afraid that somebody will find out that there's a group of people at temple and do a drive-by kind of thing. But that's people's nature right now, and it's disturbing.
Well, it is for some. I mean, we really are seeing this split. There are many people whose gut reaction is similar to what you're saying, and we have doubled down on. We're seeing a lot of people show up and choose to convert people seeking conversion. Those numbers have gone up too, the interest in it. It's so, you know, so I think we're seeing both directions. And the question that's left on the table for us, I believe, at a time when there's so there are so many forces trying to beat us down, is that we are left to figure out which path we're going to take. Right. And it's tempting to again, to go back to kind of the imagery of this Torah portion, to put our heads down. But our Torah portion is challenging us, keep your head up, step in, lean in, get involved. You know, I did the other night, I did a mezuzah hanging at on the front doorway of one of our members' homes. And we stood at the front door hanging this mezuzah and talked about the number of conversations I've had, I'm sure many of you have as well, in the last year and a half, people who are feeling so tempted, or actually doing, to take it down. And how different and empowering and emboldening it was to stand there and put it up on a busy street, black doorway, white mezuzah, you can't miss it. And they wanted to do it. So, I mean, there are different ways to go. I believe that the Torah portion is reminding us to lift our own heads and own our space and who we are, but also to lift each other up while we do it, because it's pretty easy to get into the spiral of putting our heads down and hiding away. Susan, were you going to say something? Somebody had their hand up.
Where am I? Yeah, I was going to say that is a justifiable fear.
Mhm.
Because it's, look, now we're going to every other day, someone being attacked from the couple at the Israeli embassy to Boulder and the like. But there are ways to lift up our own heads to try and counteract it. And that I found with various Jewish organizations, which are trying to gain funds for security measures. And you can contribute to them, and you know, they're sending out petitions and to Congress people and the like. Hopefully they'll be doing something, but there are a number of Jewish organizations that say we're going to try and counteract this, and this is how.
Right. And I've had multiple conversations this week alone. I had one last night with members of the community who are saying, how can I counteract this? I want to fight this. I want to do something.
Right.
Lift my head and do something. And we talk about the different ways of doing that. One is to get involved with an organization that is fighting anti-Semitism. Great.
Right.
Another way is to double down on your engagement with the community you're already part of, right? Or to seek a community where you can fight it by living a joyful Jewish life, right? And to your point, Susan, I think it's human nature to go through phases where sometimes we are inclined to just step up and lift our heads, and we can lift our heads. And sometimes we need help doing that. And it's completely understandable, but that's why we're part of something bigger than ourselves. We, as a community, have an obligation to lift each other up. And let's not forget that priestly benediction and where all of this census business and lifting business comes from God, right? So sometimes we can get the support we need to do it from our community. And as a community, we can provide that support. And sometimes we look to God to help us do that. Brad and then Penina.
Yeah, I want to end on a positive note. You know, Rabbi, we're also members of the Reform Synagogue in Boulder.
Oh, you
and yes, and my daughter worked at the Reform Synagogue in Boulder. And I just want to point out that every year Boulder has a Jewish festival this weekend. And you know what? They didn't cancel the festival. They're continuing to have the festival on Pearl Street at the location where the massacre took place. So, you know, people are raising their heads, put it that way.
Absolutely. Thank you. And not easily. Yes. Thank you for saying that. Yes, it's I've been thinking about one of my classmates is the rabbi of that synagogue. And
oh, really? Rabbi Green? Oh
and,
my gosh.
Yeah, he's really phenomenal.
Yeah.
I haven't spoken to him. He's been a little busy, but have
He
been
has.
on and trying to manifest the strength to him to help. I mean, I feel the spiritual need to help lift his head and his community, right? We all do, because God bless them for stepping out there this weekend to do what they need to do. Thank you for that example. I do want to end on that positive note, but Penina, really quickly.
Okay, I wanted to tell you that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, what they discovered, yes, they were looking on television. They showed a lot of people that know archaeology and stuff like that, trying to figure out. They were trying to figure out if Jesus was mentioned. But I want to tell you that the whole thing that they found was the Book of Maccabees. It was strategies of war, literally. It was all strategies, the Book of Maccabees. That's what they found. So in other words, we cannot also, especially if you live in an area like Israel, who is surrounded by this, you cannot just sit there and take whatever it is that anybody else who doesn't like you is deciding to dish out. So you have to lift up your head, but also take care of yourself. You can't just sit there and let other people do to you whatever it is you don't want to. That's it.
Right. Thank you. So I want to end by saying to you that last line of that benediction, because I want us to carry it in a different kind of way. You've heard the words, but understanding that when God's face is lifted, maybe then our faces will be lifted, and maybe then there will be some shalom. And it all starts with the counting, remembering that every single person needs to be counted and have their place. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
This was wonderful,
you.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Very-
Good to see
Really
you.
very,
you.
very special. Very, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
You too.
Thank you, Rabbi.